The private jet sat gleaming on the tarmac at Heathrow Airport, its sleek silver body reflecting the gray London morning. Tom Parker Bowles adjusted his designer sunglasses as he walked across the runway, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the concrete. As Camilla's eldest son, he had grown accustomed to certain privileges that came with his mother's position as queen consort, but today felt different somehow. The flight attendant greeted him with a polite smile as he boarded the aircraft. Tom had planned this trip to Monaco for weeks, looking forward to a quiet weekend away from the constant scrutiny that followed his family. The jet's interior was luxuriously appointed with cream leather seats and mahogany trim, exactly the kind of comfort he expected for such journeys. As Tom settled into his seat and accepted a glass of champagne, he noticed unusual activity outside the aircraft windows. Several black vehicles had pulled up near the plane, and men in dark suits were stepping out. His stomach tightened as he recognized the unmistakable bearing of Royal Protection officers. The lead officer, Inspector James Morrison, approached the aircraft with purposeful strides. Morrison had served the royal family for over 15 years and had never encountered a situation quite like this one. Earlier that morning, he had received an urgent call from Buckingham Palace security. Ancient royal regalia, some of the most sacred treasures of the British monarchy, had gone missing from a secure vault. The missing items included a ceremonial sword dating back to King Charles II, an ornate crown worn by Queen Victoria during state occasions, and most concerning of all, a jeweled scepter that had been blessed by the Archbishop of Canterbury centuries ago. These weren't just valuable artifacts. They were symbols of the monarchy's divine authority and historical continuity. Morrison's team had been tracking the movements of anyone with access to the palace in recent days. Tom Parker Bowles' name had appeared on their list, not because he was necessarily suspected, but because protocol demanded they investigate every possibility. The inspector knew this was delicate territory, questioning a member of the royal family even by marriage. Inside the jet, Tom watched nervously as the officers approached. He had no idea why they might be interested in his travel plans, but years of living in the public eye had taught him that controversy could emerge from nowhere. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Call me immediately. Important family matter." The flight crew exchanged worried glances as Inspector Morrison presented his credentials at the aircraft door. The captain, a veteran pilot who had flown royalty for decades, had never experienced a situation where law enforcement boarded one of his flights. He reluctantly granted permission for the search, knowing he had little choice in the matter. Tom's mind raced as he tried to think of anything that might have prompted this unexpected visit. He had attended several royal functions recently, including a private dinner at Clarence House and a charity gala where his mother had worn some of the crown jewels. Could there be some connection he was missing? Morrison stepped into the aircraft's cabin, his expression professionally neutral but his eyes alert. He had conducted hundreds of searches during his career, but never one involving such historically significant items. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders as he considered the implications of what they might or might not find. The other passengers on the private flight, mostly business associates of Tom's, looked confused and concerned. None of them had any idea what was happening, and the sudden appearance of Royal Protection officers had transformed their leisurely trip into something resembling a crime scene investigation. As Morrison began to explain the situation to Tom, the younger man's face went pale. The mention of missing royal regalia sent a chill through him, not because he was guilty of anything, but because he understood the gravity of such a loss. These weren't simply valuable objects. They were irreplaceable pieces of British history. The inspector's team moved efficiently through the aircraft, checking passenger bags and cargo areas with meticulous care. They used specialized scanning equipment designed to detect precious metals and gems, technology usually reserved for the most serious security threats. Every movement was documented and photographed for the official record. Tom cooperated fully with the search, even offering to open his personal luggage without being asked. His hands shook slightly as he provided the combination to his briefcase, knowing that his entire future could depend on what happened in the next few minutes. The thought that he might somehow be connected to the theft of sacred royal artifacts was almost too much to bear. Outside the aircraft, airport security had quietly cordoned off the area, to prevent curious onlookers from witnessing the unprecedented scene. Word was already beginning to spread through the terminal that something significant was happening. Though few people understood the true nature of the situation, Morrison's radio crackled with updates from other search teams across London. Similar investigations were being conducted at various locations connected to people who had recently been in proximity to the missing Regalia. The coordination required for such an operation was enormous, involving multiple agencies and unprecedented cooperation between civilian and royal security forces. As the search continued, Tom found himself reflecting on his relationship with the royal family and the responsibilities that came with his unique position. He had always tried to maintain a respectful distance from official royal duties, while supporting his mother in her role as queen consort. The idea that he might now be connected to such a serious security breach was devastating. Inspector Morrison's radio buzzed with an urgent message as his team continued their methodical search of the aircraft. The voice on the other end belonged to Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Walsh from Scotland Yard's Art and Antiquities Unit, who had been coordinating the broader investigation. From her command center in New Scotland, Yard Walsh had been tracking the movements of the stolen regalia using advanced forensic techniques and international intelligence networks. Her team had discovered that several pieces of the missing royal treasures had been photographed at a private auction house in Geneva just 48 hours earlier. The timing coincided perfectly with Tom Parker Bowles' scheduled departure to Monaco, raising immediate red flags. Back on the aircraft, Tom's business associate, Marcus Rothwell, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Rothwell had been Tom's financial advisor for the past 3 years, managing various investments and business ventures. What Tom didn't know was that Rothwell had been struggling with massive gambling debts and had recently made contact with certain individuals who dealt in high-value stolen artifacts. As Morrison's team opened the cargo hold beneath the passenger cabin, they discovered several unmarked wooden crates that hadn't appeared on the aircraft's official manifest. The captain, growing increasingly nervous, claimed no knowledge of how these additional items had been loaded onto the plane. His crew began checking their documentation frantically, trying to understand how unauthorized cargo had ended up on their flight. Tom watched in growing horror as the officers used crowbars to carefully open the first crate. Inside, wrapped in velvet cloth, was an ornate ceremonial sword with an elaborate golden hilt encrusted with rubies and emeralds. Even to Tom's untrained eye, it was clearly an object of enormous historical significance and value. The second crate revealed Queen Victoria's state crown, its diamonds catching the cabin lights and creating brilliant reflections across the aircraft's interior. Morrison immediately recognized it from his extensive training on royal artifacts and felt his heart rate increase. They had found exactly what they were looking for. But the discovery raised far more questions than it answered. Tom's legs nearly gave out as he stared at the recovered treasures. He had absolutely no idea how these priceless artifacts had ended up on his private jet, and the implications were terrifying. Being found in possession of stolen royal regalia could result in treason charges, a crime that carried the most severe penalties under British law. Morrison radioed the discovery to his command center, speaking in carefully coded language to maintain operational security. Within minutes, additional backup units were dispatched to the airport, including specialists from the Crown Jeweler's office who could officially authenticate the recovered items. Meanwhile, Rothwell's behavior was becoming increasingly suspicious. He kept glancing toward the emergency exits and appeared to be calculating distances and timing. Morrison's trained eye caught these subtle movements, and he quietly signaled to his team to keep Rothwell under close observation. The third crate contained the missing jeweled scepter, perhaps the most sacred of all the stolen items. This particular artifact had been used in coronation ceremonies for over 3 centuries, and was considered irreplaceable by historians and the royal family alike. Its recovery was crucial not just for its monetary value, but for its profound symbolic importance to the British monarchy. As news of the discovery reached Buckingham Palace, Queen Camilla was informed immediately. She was attending a charity luncheon when her private secretary whispered the update in her ear. The color drained from her face as she realized her son was at the center of an international incident involving the theft of sacred royal treasures. Tom's phone rang continuously, with calls from reporters who had somehow learned about the airport incident. His publicist was frantically trying to manage the situation, But information was leaking faster than they could control it. Within hours, the story would be front-page news across the globe. Inspector Morrison began conducting formal interviews with each person on the aircraft. Tom insisted on his complete innocence and cooperation, providing detailed accounts of his recent activities and contacts. His story seemed genuine, but Morrison had seen skilled liars before and maintained his professional skepticism. The aircraft's maintenance records were seized as evidence, along with security footage from the hangar where the plane had been stored overnight. Investigators would need to trace every person who had access to the aircraft in the days leading up to the discovery. Rothwell, when questioned, became increasingly evasive about his recent business dealings. He claimed to know nothing about the crates in the cargo hold, but his nervous behavior suggested otherwise. Morrison decided to separate him from the other passengers for individual questioning. The airport's security team reviewed surveillance footage that showed the mysterious crates being loaded onto the aircraft late the previous evening. The workers responsible claimed they had received proper authorization and paperwork, but those documents were now nowhere to be found. As word spread throughout the royal household, other family members began to question their own recent interactions with palace security. Had there been other breaches they weren't aware of? The discovery on Tom's jet suggested a much larger security failure than anyone had initially realized. The media frenzy was beginning to build as reporters gathered outside the airport perimeter. Photographers with telephoto lenses were trying to capture images of the search operation, while news helicopters circled overhead despite airspace restrictions. Morrison knew they were running out of time before the situation became a complete circus. He needed to gather as much evidence as possible before the intense media scrutiny made further investigation nearly impossible. The pressure to solve this case quickly was enormous, given its potential impact on the royal family's reputation. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Walsh arrived at Heathrow Airport within 30 minutes of receiving Morrison's radio confirmation about the recovered regalia. Her team from Scotland Yard's Art and Antiquities Unit had been investigating similar thefts across Europe for the past 6 months, and this discovery represented a major breakthrough in their ongoing operation. Walsh immediately took charge of questioning Marcus Rothwell, Tom's financial advisor, whose nervous behavior had caught Morrison's attention. In a private interrogation room hastily set up in the airport security office, Rothwell's carefully constructed facade began to crumble under professional questioning. Under intense pressure, Rothwell revealed that he had been approached 3 weeks earlier by a man named Viktor Kozlov, a Russian oligarch with connections to international art theft rings. Kozlov had offered Rothwell a substantial sum of money to facilitate the transportation of certain valuable items out of the United Kingdom, but Rothwell claimed he had no idea the objects in question were stolen royal regalia. Walsh's investigation team had been tracking Kozlov's organization for months, knowing they specialized in stealing and smuggling high-value cultural artifacts from museums and private collections across Europe. The theft of British royal regalia represented a significant escalation in their criminal activities and suggested they had developed inside connections to very sensitive security systems. Meanwhile, Tom Parker Bowles was being questioned separately by Inspector Morrison. Tom's shock and confusion appeared genuine as he described his complete ignorance about how the stolen artifacts had ended up on his aircraft. He provided detailed information about his recent activities, travel plans, and business relationships, cooperating fully with the investigation. The aircraft's crew was also being interviewed extensively. The captain revealed that the mysterious cargo crates had been loaded by workers claiming to represent Tom's transportation company, but when contacted, that company denied sending any personnel to the airport. It became clear that sophisticated identity fraud had been used to gain access to the aircraft. Security footage from the airport showed the fake workers loading the crates onto Tom's jet at approximately 11:30 p.m. the previous evening. The individuals wore appropriate uniforms and had proper identification badges, but facial recognition software was being used to determine their true identities. Queen Camilla arrived at a private entrance to Heathrow Airport, accompanied by her personal protection officers and a senior representative from Buckingham Palace. Her face was grave as she was briefed on the situation involving her son and the recovered royal treasures. The potential damage to the royal family's reputation was enormous. Walsh's team discovered that Rothwell's gambling debts totaled over £2 million, money he owed to various illegal betting operations across London. His financial desperation had made him vulnerable to recruitment by Kozlov's criminal organization, though he maintained he never intended to participate in stealing from the royal family. The investigation revealed that Kozlov's team had been conducting surveillance on various members of the royal household for weeks, looking for opportunities to access secure areas of Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle. They had identified Rothwell as a potential inside source through his business relationship with Tom Parker Bowles. Tom's mother sat with him in a private room at the airport, holding his hand as he struggled to process the magnitude of the situation. Despite her own shock and concern, Queen Camilla maintained her characteristic dignity while dealing with what could become one of the most serious scandals of her time as queen consort. The recovered regalia was being carefully examined by experts from the Tower of London, who confirmed that all 3 pieces were authentic and appeared to be undamaged. The ceremonial sword, Queen Victoria's crown, and the jeweled scepter represented centuries of British royal history and were literally irreplaceable cultural treasures. Walsh's investigation team was working around the clock to trace the full extent of Kozlov's criminal network. They had identified at least 6 other individuals who might have been involved in planning and executing the theft from the royal vaults, and international arrest warrants were being prepared. The airport had been transformed into a crime scene investigation hub, with forensic specialists collecting fingerprints, DNA samples, and other physical evidence from the aircraft and cargo crates. Every detail was being documented as potential evidence for what would undoubtedly be a high-profile criminal trial. Rothwell's confession revealed that he had provided Kozlov's team with detailed information about Tom's travel schedule and aircraft arrangements, though he claimed this was presented to him as part of a legitimate business opportunity rather than a criminal conspiracy. His cooperation was seen as essential to uncovering the full scope of the plot. News of the incident was spreading rapidly through social media, despite efforts by the palace's communications team to manage the story. Hashtags related to the royal regalia theft were trending globally, and speculation about Tom Parker Bowles' involvement was growing more intense by the hour. The investigation was revealing alarming security vulnerabilities within the royal household's protective systems. If criminals could successfully steal sacred regalia and nearly smuggle it out of the country, what other security breaches might be possible? A comprehensive review of all royal security protocols was already being ordered. As evening approached, the full scope of the international implications was becoming clear. The theft of British royal regalia by a Russian criminal organization could create diplomatic tensions between the 2 countries, especially given the current state of international relations and ongoing sanctions. Tom remained at the airport under protective custody, not as a criminal suspect but as a potential target for Kozlov's organization. If they were willing to use him unknowingly in their smuggling operation, they might also consider him a liability, who needed to be eliminated to prevent further cooperation with law enforcement. Viktor Kozlov was sitting in his luxurious London penthouse when news of the airport discovery reached him through his network of informants. The Russian oligarch had built his fortune through a combination of legitimate businesses and sophisticated criminal enterprises, but the failure of the royal regalia operation represented his most significant setback in years. Kozlov immediately activated his emergency protocols, instructing his associates to destroy evidence and prepare for rapid departure from the United Kingdom. His organization had backup plans for exactly this type of scenario, but the high-profile nature of the royal theft made escape much more complicated than usual. Back at Heathrow Airport, Detective Chief Inspector Walsh was coordinating with international law enforcement agencies to track Kozlov's movements. Interpol had been monitoring his activities across multiple countries, and the British authorities now had sufficient evidence to request his immediate arrest and extradition. The investigation had revealed that the theft from the royal vaults was far more sophisticated than initially understood. Kozlov's team had spent months studying the security systems at Buckingham Palace, using advanced technology to map guard rotations, surveillance camera coverage, and electronic security measures. Tom Parker Bowles was finally allowed to leave the airport late in the evening, but only after providing extensive testimony and agreeing to remain available for further questioning. His reputation had been severely damaged by the day's events, despite his obvious innocence in the actual theft of the royal regalia. Queen Camilla returned to Buckingham Palace to meet with senior security officials and palace administrators. The discussion focused on implementing immediate improvements to prevent similar security breaches in the future. The fact that sacred royal treasures had been stolen from supposedly secure vaults was deeply troubling to everyone involved. Marcus Rothwell was formally arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit theft and facilitate the transportation of stolen goods. His cooperation with the investigation had been valuable, but his role in the criminal enterprise could not be overlooked. He faced the possibility of several years in prison if convicted. The recovered regalia was transported under heavy security back to the Tower of London, where it would undergo detailed forensic examination before being returned to its proper place in the royal collection. Each piece would need to be authenticated and checked for any damage that might have occurred during its brief theft. Meanwhile, Kozlov was making his final preparations to flee London. His private jet was being prepared at a small airfield outside the city, and false documentation had been prepared for his escape to a non-extradition country. However, his movements were being tracked by multiple intelligence agencies working together. The media coverage of the royal regalia theft had become international news, with television crews from around the world descending on London to report on the unprecedented security breach. The royal family's press office was working overtime to manage the narrative and minimize damage to the monarchy's reputation. Palace security officials were conducting urgent reviews of all personnel who had access to the royal vaults and ceremonial treasures. Background checks were being repeated and new security protocols were being implemented immediately to prevent future thefts. Inspector Morrison received word that surveillance teams had located Kozlov's penthouse and were preparing to move in for his arrest. The Russian oligarch's criminal network was being systematically dismantled, with arrests taking place simultaneously across multiple locations in London. The investigation had also revealed connections between Kozlov's organization and several high-profile art thefts across Europe over the past 2 years. Museums in Paris, Rome, and Vienna had all reported mysterious disappearances of valuable artifacts that now appeared to be connected to the same criminal enterprise. Tom's business associates were also being questioned to determine if any of them had unknowing connections to the criminal conspiracy. The investigation was revealing how sophisticated modern criminal organizations could infiltrate legitimate business relationships to facilitate their illegal activities. Queen Camilla held an emergency meeting with King Charles III to discuss the security implications of the theft and recovery. The incident had highlighted serious vulnerabilities in the protection of the royal family's most precious possessions, and comprehensive reforms would be necessary. The forensic examination of the aircraft revealed fingerprints and DNA evidence that connected several known criminals to Kozlov's organization. This physical evidence would be crucial in building strong legal cases against all participants in the theft. Conspiracy Rothwell's detailed confession was providing investigators with valuable intelligence about how the criminal organization operated, including their methods for recruiting, inside sources, and their techniques for smuggling stolen artifacts across international borders. The international implications of the case were becoming more complex as diplomatic channels were activated to coordinate the investigation across multiple countries. The theft of British royal regalia by Russian criminals had political dimensions that extended far beyond ordinary law enforcement concerns. As midnight approached, armed police surrounded Kozlov's penthouse building in preparation for his arrest. The operation required careful coordination to prevent the destruction of evidence and ensure that other members of the criminal organization could not escape or warn their associates. The day's events had transformed what began as a routine security check into one of the most significant criminal investigations in recent British history. The recovery of the sacred regalia had prevented an international embarrassment, but the security failures that allowed the theft would require extensive investigation and reform. Tom Parker Bowles returned home to find media crews camped outside his residence, despite his obvious status as an unwitting victim rather than a criminal participant. His association with the case would likely follow him for years, regardless of his complete innocence in the actual crimes. The armed police operation to arrest Viktor Kozlov began at precisely 2:15 a.m., with specialized units surrounding his penthouse building from multiple directions. Detective Chief Inspector Walsh coordinated the raid from a mobile command center, knowing that Kozlov was considered extremely dangerous and likely to resist arrest violently. As officers breached the penthouse door, they discovered that Kozlov had anticipated their arrival and had already fled through a sophisticated escape route built into the building's infrastructure. Hidden cameras revealed that he had left the building through underground tunnels connected to the London sewer system, an escape plan that must have taken months to construct. However, the raid was not entirely unsuccessful. Kozlov's hasty departure had forced him to abandon crucial evidence, including detailed plans of Buckingham Palace security systems, photographs of the stolen regalia, and financial records showing payments to various accomplices across Europe. The most shocking discovery was a detailed dossier on the royal family's movements and security arrangements, suggesting that Kozlov's organization had been conducting surveillance on multiple members of the monarchy for nearly a year. The level of intelligence they had gathered was deeply disturbing to security officials. Meanwhile, Tom Parker Bowles was struggling to cope with the media attention that continued to surround him, despite his innocence. His restaurant business was being affected as customers and business partners questioned their association with someone connected to such a high-profile criminal case. Queen Camilla made the difficult decision to temporarily distance herself publicly from her son to protect the royal family's reputation while the investigation continued. This painful choice was made on the advice of senior palace advisors who feared that continued association could damage the monarchy's standing. The investigation team discovered that Kozlov had been using a network of legitimate businesses as fronts for his criminal activities. Art galleries, shipping companies, and private security firms across London had unknowingly been facilitating the transportation and sale of stolen artifacts for months. Inspector Morrison's team was working with international partners to track Kozlov's escape route. Intelligence suggested he was heading toward Eastern Europe, possibly planning to reach Russia, where extradition would be nearly impossible given current diplomatic tensions between the countries. The palace security review was revealing systematic weaknesses that had developed over many years. Ancient buildings with modern security systems created numerous vulnerabilities that sophisticated criminals could exploit with proper planning and inside information. Marcus Rothwell, now in police custody, was providing additional details about his interactions with Kozlov's organization. His testimony revealed that the criminals had been specifically targeting members of the royal household for months, looking for anyone who might be vulnerable to recruitment or manipulation. The recovered royal regalia was undergoing detailed forensic analysis to determine exactly how it had been removed from the supposedly secure royal vaults. Initial findings suggested that the thieves had used advanced electronic equipment to bypass multiple layers of security systems. European law enforcement agencies were reporting similar patterns of sophisticated art theft across the continent, all apparently connected to Kozlov's criminal network. Museums in major cities were increasing their security measures as they realized they might be potential targets. The diplomatic implications of the case were becoming increasingly complex. The British government was demanding that Russia cooperate in locating and extraditing Kozlov, but Russian authorities were claiming no knowledge of his whereabouts or activities. Tom's financial advisor role was being scrutinized by financial regulators who wanted to understand how criminals had been able to infiltrate legitimate business relationships. New regulations were being considered to prevent similar security breaches in the future. The media coverage was focusing heavily on the security failures that had allowed such valuable cultural treasures to be stolen from under the noses of supposedly elite protection services. Questions were being raised about the competence of royal security arrangements. Queen Camilla was receiving briefings twice daily about the investigation's progress, but the stress of the situation was taking a visible toll on her public appearances. Royal observers noted her subdued demeanor during official engagements. The investigation revealed that Kozlov's organization had been selling stolen artifacts to private collectors around the world, many of whom were unaware they were purchasing stolen goods. Recovery operations were being launched in multiple countries simultaneously. Airport security was being enhanced globally, as authorities realized that private jets and charter flights were being used regularly to transport stolen cultural artifacts across international borders. New inspection protocols were being implemented immediately. The Tower of London increased its security measures dramatically, with additional guards and electronic surveillance systems being installed to protect the crown jewels and other royal treasures. The incident had highlighted vulnerabilities that criminal organizations might attempt to exploit. Tom received death threats from unknown individuals who blamed him for the security breach, despite his obvious victim status in the case. Personal protection was provided for him and his immediate family members as a precautionary measure. The investigation was uncovering evidence of corruption within various organizations that had provided security services to the royal household. Several individuals were being questioned about possible collusion with Kozlov's criminal network. As dawn broke over London, the manhunt for Viktor Kozlov had expanded across Europe, with police forces in multiple countries coordinating their efforts to locate and arrest him before he could escape to a safe haven beyond the reach of British justice. 3 days after his escape from London, Viktor Kozlov was finally captured at a private airfield near Prague, just as he was preparing to board a flight to Moscow. Czech police, working with Interpol and British authorities, surrounded the aircraft and arrested him without incident. The international cooperation that led to his capture demonstrated the global commitment to recovering stolen cultural treasures. The arrest came after intelligence agencies tracked Kozlov's movements through a network of surveillance cameras and financial transactions. His attempt to use false documentation had been anticipated, and authorities were waiting for him when he arrived at what he thought was a safe departure point. Back in London, news of Kozlov's capture brought relief to the royal family and security officials who had been working around the clock to resolve the crisis. Detective Chief Inspector Walsh flew to Prague immediately to oversee Kozlov's extradition to the United Kingdom, where he would face charges related to the theft of royal regalia. Tom Parker Bowles held his first press conference since the incident, flanked by his legal team and speaking directly to the media about his traumatic experience. He expressed gratitude to law enforcement for their professionalism and emphasized his complete cooperation throughout the investigation. The press conference helped to restore Tom's reputation, as he was able to explain clearly how he had been manipulated by criminals without his knowledge. Public sympathy began to shift in his favor as people understood that he had been an unwitting victim of a sophisticated criminal conspiracy. Queen Camilla issued a statement through Buckingham Palace, expressing her pride in her son's conduct during the crisis and her gratitude to law enforcement for recovering the sacred royal treasures. The statement marked the beginning of a rehabilitation of Tom's public image. Marcus Rothwell pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges and was sentenced to 4 years in prison, though his cooperation with the investigation resulted in a reduced sentence. His testimony would be crucial in the upcoming trial of Kozlov and his associates. The trial of Viktor Kozlov began 6 months later and became one of the most watched criminal proceedings in recent British history. Evidence presented in court revealed the extraordinary sophistication of his criminal organization and their systematic targeting of cultural institutions across Europe. Kozlov was ultimately convicted on multiple charges, including theft of royal property, conspiracy, and leading a criminal organization. He received a sentence of 25 years in prison, sending a strong message to other criminals who might consider targeting British cultural treasures. The palace security review resulted in comprehensive reforms of protection systems for royal residences and treasures. New technology was installed, personnel procedures were updated, and coordination between different security agencies was significantly improved. The recovered royal regalia was eventually returned to its proper place in the royal collection, though not before undergoing extensive conservation work to ensure it had not been damaged during its brief theft. Special ceremonies were held to mark its safe return. Tom Parker Bowles gradually rebuilt his business relationships and public reputation, though the experience had changed him profoundly. He became an advocate for stronger security measures to protect cultural heritage and worked with law enforcement to prevent similar crimes. Several other members of Kozlov's criminal network were arrested and prosecuted in various countries, leading to the recovery of dozens of stolen artifacts from museums and private collections across Europe. The international investigation became a model for future cooperation in combating art crime. The incident led to significant improvements in security, coordination between different agencies responsible for protecting British cultural treasures. New protocols were established for sharing intelligence and responding to threats against historically significant artifacts. European museums implemented enhanced security measures based on lessons learned from the royal regalia theft. The case demonstrated how sophisticated criminal organizations could exploit weaknesses in even the most prestigious cultural institutions. The relationship between Tom and his mother, Queen Camilla, was ultimately strengthened by their shared experience of the crisis. The difficult period had tested their family bonds, but ultimately demonstrated their mutual support and loyalty. Detective Chief Inspector Walsh was promoted to lead a new international task force focused on combating art crime and cultural heritage theft. Her success in the Royal Regalia case had established her as a leading expert in this specialized field of law enforcement. Inspector Morrison continued his service with the Royal Protection Unit, though the experience had highlighted areas where security procedures needed improvement. His professional handling of the investigation was recognized with commendations from senior officials. The case became a subject of study in law enforcement academies and security training programs around the world. The sophisticated methods used by Kozlov's organization provided valuable lessons for protecting cultural treasures from future criminal threats. In the years that followed, Tom Parker Bowles would occasionally speak about his experience as a reminder of how innocent people could become unwitting participants in sophisticated criminal schemes. His story served as a cautionary tale about the importance of vigilance and security awareness. The royal regalia that had been stolen and recovered was eventually displayed in a special exhibition about the case, educating the public about the importance of protecting cultural heritage. The exhibition became one of the most popular displays in the Tower of London's history. The incident ultimately strengthened rather than weakened the British monarchy's security arrangements, as the comprehensive reforms implemented after the theft created a more robust protection system for the royal family and their treasures. The crisis had been successfully resolved, but its lessons would be remembered for generations to come.